Before this video starts, I would just like to say that Sonic the Hedgehog and all related characters are owned by Sega. No copyright infringement is intended. Hello everyone, my name is Cloudy. Today I'm going to be discussing the game that kickstarted one of the most controversial game franchises in recent times, Sonic the Hedgehog. Recently, Sonic the Hedgehog's game series has gone through some tough times, especially during the dark age of his franchise. However, Sonic has been able to redeem himself several times since the beginning of the dark age. In fact, Sonic has since exited his darker times and moved on to a lighter, more kid-friendly take on the games. But this doesn't mean Sonic has had the best run since. A lot of disappointing titles have arrived since he left the Dark Age, such as Sonic Boom, Rise of Lyric, Sonic Boom, Shattered Crystal, Sonic Forces, and Sonic Lost World. Because of the negative reviews both critics and players have given the games, it makes you wonder, was Sonic better then, or has he always been like this? Today we're going to be taking a step back and looking into the first Sonic game ever released, Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sega Genesis. Please note that this video just gives my honest opinion and that you shouldn't take any offense from the content that I discuss in this video. The purpose of this video is to see if the original Sonic the Hedgehog game is the best of the entire franchise. Alright, let's begin my honest take on Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog was released on the Mega Drive and Sega Genesis in 1991 and was a groundbreaking video game for its time. This game had such a big impact on the video game industry, and it could have even beaten Nintendo in the console wars going on at the time. Sega replaced their former mascot Alex Kidd with Sonic the Hedgehog, a character whose rapid speeds and cocky attitude formed an icon. One positive about the original Sonic game was the speed you could reach and the good platforming. The second Green Hill Zone opened on people's screens, they wanted to play more of the game. This is because of the insane speeds for such a great opening level. It also had some decent platforming for its time. Nintendo, prior to Sega's success, released Super Mario Bros. For the NES, which was an instant catch. People often tried to speedrun the levels and got away with it. Then, in 1991, Sega released Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sega Genesis. The Sega Genesis was able to handle good speeds and graphics via blast processing, so making the character blaze through the levels was no problem. This is probably why Green Hill Zone was such a great hit among the fanbase at first. You could run wild and have some extra fun with good platforming. Another positive of the zone was the great soundtrack playing in the background. Masato Nakamura composed the original soundtrack for Sonic 1, and it pays off well. He managed to blend in high-frequency noises with low-frequency noises, which created an amazing soundtrack because of how well he uses to his advantage. Each song throughout the game fit well with the zones, especially with Scrap Brain Zone and Spring Yard Zone. Green Hill Zone's theme was upbeat and cheerful, representing the bright and happy colors present through the level. This was executed excellently, and it is great to listen to while zooming through the zone. The sound chip used for the soundtrack in Sega Genesis itself was the Yamaha 2612. It had great sound quality for its time. The level was also full of greatly detailed sprites and animations. The sprites had differently colored bits throughout, such as Sonic's leg that was further from the screen being colored darker to represent a shadow. The animations were also good, especially the ones where Sonic was about to fall off an edge. You could see the worry in his eyes, and it is demonstrated acceptably. The boss of this zone is an iconic boss in the Sonic fanbase. It sounds, and kind of is, lame considering Robotnik has an IQ of over 300, but it still demonstrates great fun. One more positive thing about this zone was the iPhone/iPad port of the game done by Christian Whitehead. The soundtrack was enhanced to match today's standards in music, and the graphics seem to have been improved, and overall the game seems livelier. And now it's time to move on to the cons of Green Hill Zone. I honestly only have one con of the zone, which is the weird spike glitch in the original port of the game. If you don't know what this is, it's when you fall into a spike or touch a spike and lose your rings, but then you fall into another one an instant later and die. Even in your few frames of invincibility, you still take damage. And aside from that one complaint, this is a solid zone. The positives outweigh the negatives by a long shot, and now it's time to move on to the second zone of the game, Marble Zone, which is often criticized for its difficulty and slower pace. Ah yes, the classic, difficult, slow, and painful Marble Zone. The zone that a lot of people hate, and I can definitely see why. This zone takes place right after Green Hill Zone, and already from the start you can see that the clock slowed down a lot, especially compared to the fast-paced previous zone. The moment you hear the darker theme music, you know that the game increased in difficulty, and that the game temporarily got more boring. I personally have done well with this zone ever since I purchased it on PC. On mobile, which is where I originally played the game, it's more difficult considering the slippery controls that are present. But on the Sega Genesis, Mega Drive, or on PC, you shouldn't have a problem with the controls. The graphics, such as the background and coloring, look a lot drearier, giving the overall look of the zone a duller feel to it. The enemy placement in the zone is kind of awkward, and the same goes with the obstacles, especially with the spikes. When you get to Act 3, right as you're about to reach the boss of Marble Zone, you need to do some tricky platforming while trying to avoid spikes. If you fall, you'll probably land right into a lava pit, which is frustrating for most players, including myself. And speaking of lava pits, there are lava pits all over the map. No matter which route you take, you will stumble upon lava. There is no way around it. If you're not careful enough, the lava can be detrimental to you. One other instance with obstacles is the moving pillar placement. If you try to go fast, you can easily be squashed by a moving pillar. You must be careful while trying to go fast. The music, like I mentioned before, is kind of tedious. The notes are a lot lower, which makes the music kind of sad, especially compared to its predecessor, Green Hill Zone. The attention to detail in this zone is great. You can see faces carved onto some objects, and the pillars in the background can be tilted. It seems that they went all out with their attention to detail. The boss of the zone is quite easy once you get the hang of it. All you must do is jump platforms and hit Robotnik while trying to dodge lava. And that's all I have to really say about the zone. The difficulty increased by a long shot, and the zone is much slower. But if you really try, you can have a lot of fun. Spring Yard Zone steps things up quite a bit compared to Marble Zone. We went from the more tedious mountains full of lava to a jazzy map full of exploration. I honestly believe this zone feels quite rewarding after completing a tougher zone. And I personally prefer the zone over Green Hill Zone for a lot of different reasons. For one thing, this zone has far more superior music. The jazzy tip to the song is so satisfying to listen to on a lazy Sunday. And let's not forget the excellent platforming demonstrated throughout the entire level. The zone just makes you want to go fast, makes you want to try as hard as you can to achieve the insane speeds that you're capable of reaching. And you can clearly see that here. Spring Yard Zone, while a bit tedious at times, definitely wants you to have fun throughout the entire level. Although some enemy placement can be pretty awkward, and this one Batnik demonstrated on screen can chase you, it's overall a pretty fun and pretty good zone. It's well crafted by the developers, and it definitely had a lot of effort put into it. And whenever you fail at a portion of the zone, it makes you want to try again. That's something only a few zones in the... Another example of this is Labyrinth Zone, which we will get to very shortly. And as with Marble Zone, the attention to detail in this entire zone is amazing, ranging from the city streets in the background to the well-detailed sprites and pipes. One part about the zone which is kind of a downfall though was the boss towards the end of the stage. Robotnik, being the absolute genius he can be, decides to create the most dangerous device he can possibly think of. A spike that removes blocks, trying to penetrate Sonic through the skull. But for real though, this boss really is atrocious for a lot of different reasons. It's either easy or hard depending on how good you are at the game. Robotnik drops down when he senses Sonic, or sees Sonic, and tries to hit you with one spike. And if he misses you, then he picks up the block, which is an atrocious idea. And the only reason why it can be hard is because he removes the blocks, and that's really about it. Other than that, I'd say it's a pretty good zone for the attention to detail, the music, the sound effects, the sprites, all that good stuff. But one more thing is that I actually do have a lot of fun with the boss, despite it being one of the worst in the franchise. Now, I bet all of you can probably guess what I'm going to say about the zone, but to be honest, I don't actually hate this zone all that much. It can actually be pretty fun for the first two acts, but the third act, I'm going to get right to the point. I despise the third act for a lot of different reasons. It slows it down even more than it did for the first two. It's boring, it's long, the boss is awful, and the mechanics are terrible. One of the worst things about the zone is the enemy and spike placement. They expect you to be able to dodge a swinging chain with the spike on it perfectly, especially in the third act, while you're trying to jump platforms. They were originally going to make this zone the second zone of the original Sonic game, but of course, them thinking with their good minds decided not to and let the player develop more in the game, which was a clever choice because if this was the second zone of the game, they would have lost customers by a long shot. Just imagine going to your friend's house and saying, hey, look at this new Sonic game that just came out, and you display them with a recreation of Labyrinth Zone. And they're like, no way, I'm not gonna, play that game, play that zone, because it was one of the worst zones in Sonic history. Well, of course this zone was awful. And, the mechanic of bringing in water was pretty clever, but the thing is that one of the creators mistakenly said that hedgehogs cannot swim, and that's why this level exists. They can swim. There are videos of them swimming on YouTube. But all in all, I do think this was actually a pretty well-made zone. They definitely stepped up the difficulty by a long shot, and you could clearly tell here. Now, I'm actually going to go move on and talk about the one and only Dreadful Boss. Now, you would probably expect, like, this big battle in the water, like in, I think it was the Game Gear port of the game. No, instead you have to fight him. Well, water rises to the top. Now, this wouldn't exactly be a problem if there weren't obstacles trying to knock you down, like spears and, like whatever those laser things coming out of the bears are. I mean, come on! This is only the 4th of the 6th zone in the game. It should really start to get difficult by the 5th and 6th. And that exactly is the biggest con of the original Sonic game. It's Labyrinth Zone Act 3. And other than that, I actually think it's a pretty good zone. I think it's a bit too unappreciated for its time. Now we're going to go ahead and move on and talk about Starlight Zone. Pretty bland and kind of boring zone. Now, the problem with this zone is that once you complete the first 2 acts, it gets pretty tedious on the third one, considering you've pretty much seen all the content that it has to offer. It's actually not a bad zone by any means. The soundtrack is good, the level design is good, everything about the zone is good. It's just based on the stuff that happened in the previous zone, I'm pretty sure the zone felt way too easy. I mean, we just got off a zone where you have to climb to the top. Well, there's water rising, and there's spikes poking out at you while you're trying to chase a big fat guy who's trying to end the world. I mean, come on. Of course, the stakes in the zone are much lower. However, the attention to detail, especially in the background with all the bricks and all that, is amazing. It looked very real for its time, and I think it still holds up to this day, especially compared to, newer platformers and all that. Another highlight of the zone is the boss towards the end. This one was definitely better than the Spring Yard boss, and of course the stakes are lower than Labyrinth Zone's boss, but it was still a pretty fun boss to play. It had a few unique mechanics to it, and it was just overall fun to beat Robotnik after that atrocious Labyrinth Zone Act 3. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to the final zone of the game, technically, which is Scrap Brain Zone, considered to be one of the hardest bosses in Sonic history. Here we go, the Dretched Scrap Brain Zone, the final zone of the game. Now, the first 2 zones are pretty tough on its own. There are no checkpoints, it's not easy, the enemy placement is weird, the spike placement is weird, and it's just overall a harder zone than the majority of the zones in the first Sonic game, except for Labyrinth Zone. That one just tops this one by a lot. However, speaking of Labyrinth Zone, the 3rd act of the Scrap Brain Zone is a Labyrinth Zone recolor, possibly due to time constraints in the release of the game. Now, of course, this caused a lot of problems, considering Labyrinth Zone is the worst zone possibly in Sonic history to most players. And of course, we do not want to see the return of this god-awful zone in the first game it appeared in. Now, I'll be honest, this is not as hard as the entire Labyrinth Zone prior to this act. However, I will say it is still pretty challenging at some points. Now, apparently there is a shortcut that I was trying to take right here and that many other players have taken before. But, it's really not that common knowledge that there's going to be a shortcut to such a wretched hard zone. But the first 2 acts did get challenging at first, so I guess it was kind of a refreshment in a way to see a unique, more different kind of final zone for a game. So I guess that is kind of a positive for Scrap Brain Zone. Other than that, the attention to detail is good, the music is good. The boss, which is the final boss of the game, is actually pretty okay, which I'm about to get to in 1 second. But of course, there are some drowning problems and checkpoint problems and bubble problems throughout the zone. So people are going to struggle with the zone just as much as they did with Labyrinth Zone. But I mean, overall, I'd call it a pretty well-made zone, even though it was kind of rushed in the end considering time constraints. But I'm pretty happy with the overall result of the majority of the zones. And now we're going to move on to the final boss of the game. With some practice and some luck, you should be able to beat this boss without a problem. It was actually a pretty unique and inventive boss, presenting some newer mechanics for the entire series. Now, overall, I'm pretty satisfied with this boss. I'd say the music is excellent for a final throwdown between a hedgehog and an IQ genius. But there are some flaws. There are some moments where the game tends to troll you, where you think Robotnik is going to appear in a certain pillar, but he appears in the other one, which can be quite tricky considering it can get you squashed if you try to go over to the area where you're thinking he's going to go to. But aside from those few flaws, I'd say it's a very well detailed, very well made boss for a final game. And, you know, I'm happy with it. I'm very happy with this entire game as a whole, and we're about to discuss that in one moment. So I'm about to discuss my overall review of the entire game. So, what did I think of this game as a whole? Well, there were definitely some flaws with the game, and it is definitely not the best Sonic game. Now, why do I think it's not the best Sonic game? Well, Labyrinth Zone Act 3, Scrap Brain Zone Act 3, some trollish moments, some bugs, especially the spike glitch, and many other reasons as to why this is not the best Sonic game. However, there are a lot of positives, and they pretty much outweigh the negatives by a long shot. However, Labyrinth Zone definitely drew away a lot of people, so that definitely takes away from a lot of the positivity. And the only reason why, some of the reasons why this is not the best Sonic game is because other ones are simply just better. They've improved upon it, such as Sonic 2, which I will get to in a future video. Anyway, like I say, Sonic is not the best Sonic game, and this is going to try and be a series, so next time I'm going to be covering Sonic CD for the Sega CD. So, yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I really appreciate you guys watching it, and I will see you all in the next video. Have an awesome day. Goodbye.